Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the OROSUR Mining Investor Presentation. Throughout this recorded presentation, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged. They can be submitted at any time via the Q&A tab that's just situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Please just simply type in your questions and press send. The company may not be in a position to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company will review all of the questions submitted today and publish responses where it is appropriate to do so. Before we begin, I would like to submit the following poll, and if you could give that your kind attention, I'm sure the company would be most grateful. And I'd now like to hand you over to Chairman Louis Castro. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the company's webinar. I am Louis Castro, Chairman of the company, and the other person on the screen is Brad George, CEO. We held the company's AGM on Friday, just this last Friday. All the resolutions were passed. And as in previous years, what we're doing today is effectively extending on that AGM and having a Q&A session with shareholders and other potential investors. We've had a busy year. Brad will go into more detail on this in his presentation, which he's about to kick off. There is a bit of a hiatus at the moment. We're going into discussions with Minera Monte Aguila, and again, we'll cover this in more detail during the presentation. But those discussions are ahead of signing a new joint venture to cover phase 2 of our project in Anzá. We also have other activities ongoing in Argentina and Brazil. So things are moving along. There will be a bit of a slowdown in Colombia. We will go into detail in a few minutes. Thank you for your questions. We will address those as well at the end of the presentation. And so, without any more further ado, Brad, I'll hand over to you.
All right. Thanks, Louis. I will also make note to shareholders that Louis is currently in Bogotá. It's 4:30 a.m. Louis, you flew overnight and missed the England game, so we've taken one for the team. So lucky you won, otherwise it'd be a pretty depressing morning. So what I'll do today is just run through a quick presentation. Many of you probably would have seen much of this before. We've added a few things that are relevant to what's happened in the last few days, and there's obviously a range of questions that have been pre-submitted, and some are coming after we speak, so we can then have a bit of a Q&A. We have no time limit here, so I do tend to drone on a bit, so I'll try to keep this as painless as I can for most of you. So the usual disclaimer, which nobody ever reads. A snapshot. This hasn't changed. While obviously we had a bit of a share price fall on Friday for reasons largely related to the latest drilling results out of Colombia, and I'll speak to those in more detail in a couple of slides' time to sort of add a bit of meat to that. What is perhaps not known to many shareholders is that all announcements that we make that are related to the Colombian joint venture need to go through Agnico and Newmont first for their editorial oversight, and they tend to be a bit brutal in their editorial oversight, and they beat them to death. So most of what we might say is interesting is removed. So we tend to use these presentations to add a bit of meat. The one change here is that the roughly 10.8 million in warrants are going to expire very soon. They're obviously somewhat out of the money now, so they will fall away. So our diluted share capital will actually reduce in a couple of weeks' time. To give some history for those who've been around for a long time, OROSUR Mining, or under its previous name, Uruguay Mineral Exploration, has been around for 20 odd years, probably more. It was originally a gold miner in Uruguay. We had a reasonably sized little project down there called San Gregorio. It ran for just shy of 20 years, produced about 1.5 million ounces, and ultimately came to a sort of a rather messy end in about 2017, 2018, as most mines do. And that put the company in a difficult position financially for a few years. That ultimately led to the joint venture with Newmont on the Colombian project in September 2018. Louis and I then joined the company in 2020 to try to sort of lift the company back to a position where it was investable. I think from memory, the share price at the time was about 1.7p. and we had a little cash in the bank. So we have achieved a few things, and we are as a company quite proud that we've managed to get the company to the current position, albeit it's often a complicated story to tell. So we have 3 projects now that Uruguay is by and large wound back and off the books now. So Ansar Gold Project in Colombia is our flagship project. That is under joint venture originally to Newmont, but now to Newmont and Agnico. They formed their own little joint venture, 50-50. So they jointly run that project, although Agnico is the operator of the project. So, Newmont is the world's largest gold miner. Agnico now, post the merger with Kirkland Lake, is now the 3rd largest gold miner in the world. So it's nice to have companies running the project that have very deep pockets, because Colombia, particularly in the rugged terrain, is a place that needs deep pockets. We also have the El Pantano Gold Project in southern Argentina, which is a very early stage project, but recent work is beginning to show some promise, and I'll talk to that. And the Ariquemes Tin Project in western Brazil, which is equally we call it an early stage project, but it's surrounded by existing mining operations. So it's kind of a sort of muddy waters of greeny browny fields project, which is which again is showing some interesting promise. So back to Ansar, that project has been run now or been drilling there since about 2013. So with the previous owners, with us and with Agnico and Newmont, we are now something like 45,000 meters has been drilled, mostly in the one spot. And it's the movement out of that central location to the northern projects, which has sort of created the excitement and when we see the ultimate potential. And El Pantano, as I'll talk about, is interesting, and Ariquemes also showing some results. So off to Ansar. So we're in northwestern Colombia. We're just about 50 kilometers due west of Medellin. Without getting too esoteric in the geology, we're in what is referred to as the Mid-Cauca Belt. It's a roughly north-south striking zone of late Miocene rocks. For non-geologists, Miocenes is quite young. It varies from about 10 to 70 million years. That's young in geological time. Mostly volcanics, intrusions, some sediments that sit just to the east of the Andes mountain range, and they're sort of part of that same volcanic system that creates the Andes. And the Mid-Cauca Belt, it plays host to most of the big gold projects in Colombia. There's a range of projects there that they range from underlying porphyry systems to what we've got, which is an overlying epithermal system. An epithermal system sits above a porphyry. So depending on the elevation, the gold projects in the region vary from those two extremes. Probably the key project in the region is just north of us at Buritica. That was a project that was run by Continental Gold, who actually, casting back, were the original owners of Ansar. They had to make a decision on the two projects due to lack of money back in the old days. They chose Buritica, and Ansar went to us, and Buritica is now owned by Chinese firm Zijin, currently sitting at probably 10 to 12 million ounces at quite high grade. So that's an operating mine now. So we're in the right area. We're in the right area geologically, and we're quite comfortable that we're seeing similar things happening at Ansar as we're seeing at Buritica. So we have confidence, but it's obviously a difficult place. Our land holding is reasonably substantial for this region. We've got a range of granted titles. They're the ones in green, and the applications in red, totaling about 200 square kilometres, which is a nice parcel. We don't want too big. Holding land in Colombia is moderately expensive compared to neighbouring countries. So having a large land or having everything converted to applications to granted titles can be quite expensive. So most of the applications were left as such over many years, largely as a cost-saving measure. It's probably the eastern side of this that's most interesting. The more work we've done, the more we realise where the best structures are, and that runs up along the eastern margin. So we've got about 20 kilometres strike of two key structures, the Aragon Fault and the Tlusco Faults, which we're finding that these are the main controlling structures. As we go further to the west, we're getting into some more complicated porphyry systems, and there's a company to the west of us called Royal Road who are sitting on some interesting porphyry things, but the porphyries tend to be a bit lower grade. So and grade can make a difference in this sort of terrain. So we're quite comfortable on the eastern side where we've got some better rocks. There will probably be a reduction in this. As part of the normal process of exploration, we have to drop land off. This is what happens all over the world. We understand where we want to be, and we reduce our land holdings. So this will reduce as we work our way around forest reserves, and we drop land off as a cost-saving measure. And we've got a couple of applications just to the south that may be added to this. So we'll try to balance what we drop off with new ground being added. So that will become clear in coming weeks and months as we move forward. But we obviously are going to maintain what we think now is the key ground. Those of you who followed the story would also notice that we've changed, or not we, Agnico have changed all the prospect names. This is essentially a security issue to remove any kind of geographical content from the names. Previously, the prospect names were named after the local villages, but now they've become somewhat agnostic to villages, so that we're not giving away too much information that might attract artisanal miners. You'll also note that all of the maps on our presentations announcements lack coordinates for the same reason. In the middle here, we see the Aptar prospect. Now, Aptar was the original gold prospect that was drilled from about 2012, and that was the only place we drilled really up until the beginning of this year. Gold was found there because it was part of an old gypsum mine. There were tracks and access pads in place, so it was an easy place to drill, and so drilling was focused there, and there was some very, very high grade, very thick intersections there over the years. It's a little more complicated. It's sort of a hybrid VMS epithermal system, but shows promise and some very nice numbers in there. We didn't go north, however, or various companies didn't go north or south, largely due to one, lack of money when we were on the project, and then COVID, of course. So Agnico and Newmont joined the joint venture in the middle of COVID. We kept operating, but we had to operate in bubbles, and so moving north and south was quite a risky thing to do during COVID. So we did mapping and sampling north and south, but drilling only commenced in early to middle of this year at the Pepas project to the north. So it's been a long time getting to the point where we could drill those highly prospective prospects. So it was nice to get up there. At the moment, we're also mapping and sampling to the south at El Cedro and El Roble, showing some very promising results down there, which we've talked about in previous announcements, and they're moving to the point of perhaps being drilled prospects quite soon, but there's obviously a permitting issue. I'll jump forward now. People can go back to previous announcements at Aptar, but it was Pepas to the north that sort of created a high level of excitement when drilling began there early in the year, and obviously some disappointment on Friday with the latest results. Pepas was a prospect that's been known for some time. We identified some very high grade rock chips and veins on surface running many tens of grams, and the first hole there was drilled earlier, and of course came back with some what can only be described as quite spectacular result: 150 meters at 3 grams from surface, I might point out. So that was quite got everybody very excited, quite justifiably. Those sorts of things happen very rarely, and a couple of subsequent holes from the same location gave numbers that were of the same sort of magnitude. Now the issue here is, and this is where it gets a bit esoteric, I do apologise, it's hard for me to show in 3 dimensions when you can't see me, but it's an inherent fact that the first hole into a new prospect, while it can give very nice numbers like these, it doesn't give information related to the orientation or the shape of the target. In our particular case, it was made worse by the fact that the drill hole was located on top of the mineralised body, and mineralisation started from surface. So yes, it was a very nice intersection, but there are multiple interpretations of those intersections, and we really don't understand the depth of strike, the shape of this thing. For that to happen, we have to step back and drill from the sides. We ideally want drill holes to be starting from outside, coming in one side, drilling through the ore body, and coming out the other side. So we had to make a decision as to how we were going to do that. 2 problems, however. One is that we had no idea which way to go. There were some maybe very small hints in the drilling to suggest east or west, but really it was a bit of a coin toss. And ultimately we tossed, well, Agnico tossed the coin to go west, largely because that was an easier place to go. And then in this country, the second issue is that moving the drill rig here is not a trivial task. I mean, in Australia, we just move the truck a couple of meters here. Putting in a new pad is a monumental task of identifying where to put it, sending guys in with axes and shovels to build it, and then moving the rig itself is just a horrifying task with helicopters, and it's not something you do lightly. So the rigs were moved to the west and drilled in from the western side on the basis of thinking that the ore body or the mineralized body dipped toward the west. Now, as the last drilling showed on Friday, maybe that was the wrong call. Now, I don't necessarily have an issue with that. It was a bit of a line ball call anyway, and a 1 in 2 chance of it being wrong. But there were some other issues in where those holes were positioned that I'm slightly cautious here of not being too critical of our JV partners. They're by and large have done an amazing job, but I would have drilled those holes differently. If I know that there is uncertainty about the direction of dip of this body, then I would have drilled the hole from the west and made sure it hit the target by drilling it into the middle of the old intersections, and then stepped out in small increments. But to drill from the west and then also drill over 200 meters below the system ran the risk that if the interpretation of dip was incorrect, then the hole would entirely miss the target. And that in what my view is what's happened here, is that the target looks like it's now dipping probably more to the southeast. And by drilling from the west and by drilling deep, we essentially stood no chance of hitting it. So these holes, to my mind at least, have been, maybe they're positive and they've shown us that it was from the wrong direction, but to my mind is a reasonably expensive way to have done it. So while these on paper are obviously quite disappointing holes compared to the previous holes, if you understand how drilling works and how structural geology works, actually they didn't address any questions at all. So they've not in any way, to my mind, reduced the prospectivity of this. In fact, they've increased it by now telling us where to go. It's just that it was a very expensive exercise to do that. So that was the primary reason for Agnico wishing to slow down drilling, because clearly, again, they have to move the pads, and that's not something that they can do overnight. It will be weeks, many weeks and months to get those locations permitted, new pads built, so on and so forth. So it's a complicated process. And they would also like to do some more surface work now to just to confirm. I mean, these holes are not cheap. Diamond drilling here is about $250 a meter. So these holes are not cheap, and they want to make sure this time that they get it right. So that's being underway, and we hope that we can get those sort of things resolved in the reasonably near term. Which then leads us, I guess, to the main question of what happens next, and this just comes to the point of the work going on and the joint venture. So, yes, drilling is suspended by and large for technical reasons, but also a few political reasons that relate somewhat to the joint venture and where it currently stands. Mapping and sampling continues in the south, so we still have ground crews down there firming up those targets. And they'll be turning those into drill targets for as and when drilling recommences. The major point, however, is that we're in a bit of a limbo time-wise with the joint venture. So the joint venture was designed to run for 12 years in 3 phases, and we've just come to the end of the first phase in early September this year. So during those first 4 years, 10 million was spent and 2 million was given to us as option fees. Agnico and Newmont, by completing phase 1, have the right to earn 51%, and they have the right to move into phase 2. Now, phase 2 is 20 million over 4 years, but probably more importantly, it actually requires the development of a new joint venture. So phase 1 was an exploration agreement. They just basically had the right to work. Phase 2 now is that we form a formal joint venture, and that requires the creation of a new company, the creation of new documentation that outlines all of the terms and agreements in that JV. Now that's where things get a bit complicated. Is that there are 2 primary issues that we need to resolve, and this I guess explains why things are taking a bit longer than we would have liked. The first point is that the rules have changed. So when these structures were created back in 2014 going forward, everything was run through a holding company in Colombia, Minera and SAR, which then fed into a BVI company and then through to Canada, on the rationale that any transaction with Agnico and Newmont would be done in BVI and therefore be taxed in a fairly favourable way. That no longer works. The Colombian government has changed the rules, and they would now look through that BVI structure, and they would want to see tax levied on any transaction that involved Colombian assets. So the original plan no longer works, and so we need to be very careful to develop a new transaction structure that not only reduces or hopefully eliminates any kind of tax to be levied, but also gives us the flexibility to deal with whatever might happen in 3, 4, 5 years' time. And that's a reasonably complicated process. I'm not a lawyer, so I step back and leave it to Louis and the team. It's not easy. Even though we're not getting any cash for the asset, the fact that so much has been spent to this point means that there is essentially a sale taking place. And so we're very conscious of making sure we understand exactly what that process of what that structure looks like. And we are quite comfortable now with how that works, and we think we've got that nailed down as to how to move forward. The other problem, or the other question, however, is that Agnico and Newmont have requested to make some changes to the joint venture, and this is where things are becoming a little bit slower. Even though phase 2 requires a new joint venture, the understanding of the original agreement is that the terms of that joint venture were agreed to at the beginning. And so we have generally the right to say, well, no, we're going to stick with the terms as they were laid out in 2018. Our partners are wanting to make some changes to that. Not unsurprisingly, those changes are entirely in their own favour, which I understand. But we are very conscious of, one, not giving away something for free, and two, we have some concerns that some of those requests might create potential risks for us in a couple of years' time. So I won't go into the details, but we certainly are at this stage holding firm and making quite sure that we don't give away potentially long-term value simply to try and get some short-term gain. There are some issues with what's being requested in phase 3 that we would see as quite problematic going forward in 4 to 5 years' time. So we're at that point now where we are just bouncing ideas and things across. That's sadly a little bit slow. OROSUR, being a small company, is quite able to respond quickly. Agnico and Newmont, because they're two major companies, seem to be a bit slower. So every time we bounce around an idea, it takes a week or two to come back. So we are progressing. We're not stalled, but we are coming now down to a couple of major points that we need to resolve, and hopefully we'll do those in the next coming days and weeks. Importantly, once that's resolved, that triggers an option payment to OROSUR of $2 million. So as things currently stand, we were given notification of Agnico and Newmont's intention to move to phase 2 at the beginning of September. We are now in that process of putting it together, and that triggers a payment in January at this stage of $2 million. Now that's still on the table. Whether that happens, it still remains to be seen, but that's still the plan. And if that changes, obviously we would let people know. But that at this stage, there's been no change to that schedule. But clearly, this has dragged on to the point where we're getting near the allowed 90 days to resolve the issues, and I think we're all at the point now where we know what the final options are, and we're just having a little bit of a haggle now. So that's a complicated process, and I won't apologise for how long it takes, because I'd rather do it right than do it fast, because doing it fast and making a mistake has the potential to really come back and bite us quite severely in a couple of years' time. So it might sound easy on paper, but we need to think that every possible outcome or how things might play out in 4 to 5 years' time. So it's actually, it's going to be a 60, 70 page document. It's quite a complicated beast. So these things, there's no prizes for doing them fast. Moving into other projects. Now we've spoken in the past about other projects, and clearly for quite some years the company was not in a position to look at new projects due to lack of finances. But once an Agnico new one came into Colombia and we were able to raise some money at the end of 2020, we had the funds and we had the time to look at new projects. The question was, well, how do we do it? And our strategy was that we would, given our balance sheet was strong but not ironclad, we didn't want to go and buy our way into projects at huge cost. So we looked at projects that were in the right parts of the world, that were in very much well-endowed regions, near operating mines, had the right geology, had very large land holdings, which I thought was very important, and that we could negotiate entry for free and very low burn rates for the first couple of years, so that we had time and flexibility to do the background work. And we were not committing ourselves to big upfront payments in the first couple of years. We really like to have flexibility and options just to see how things pan out. The first of these was the Ariquemes project in western Brazil, in Rondônia province. It's a tin project. Now you might ask, well, why tin? And I said, well, why not? Tin's is a pretty exciting metal, albeit not as well known perhaps as lithium and nickel and cobalt and more than natural metals. But it's regarded as being, I think it's the glue for everything. Everything we do in the electrification space ultimately requires solder, and solder is tin. So it's an absolutely vital metal. It's quite a small global market, and most importantly, it's becoming very difficult to source supplies that we might see as ESG compliant, given that most is coming out of artisanal workings in Asia, coming out of China, coming out of parts of Africa that maybe don't play by the ESG rules to the degree that we might. And so it's becoming quite a fragile market. Now, we looked at these projects in a couple of years ago. The tin price, as you may have noted, went a bit crazy at the beginning of this year, went from its historical levels of about $18,000-$20,000 a tonne to $45,000 a tonne. It's come back, fortunately, to more sensible levels. But the region of Rondônia in the west is really one of the major provinces of the world. Tin production, it's produced something like 400,000 tonnes over the years from a couple of hard rock mines and alluvial mines. We understand exactly where the geology is. It's very mining friendly. We have 3 tin furnaces in the main town, Ariquemes, meaning that we can sell material just locally. It's very developed, lots of roads. This is the Amazon basin, but it's all been cleared for farming, so environmentally it's quite safe. Very mining friendly. Cheap power, cheap water. It's good transport. It's got a lot going for it. And we had the opportunity through a Canadian company, Meridian Mining, to take up a JV for a very, very large land holding of 3,000 square kilometres. So that's a very difficult, very rare thing to get. So and we had a lot of free government data as well. So that was a good project. We've been working on that now for a couple of months, largely in a fairly slow burn regional sampling way, just taking stream sediment samples across the entire project. Given the size of the project, that's taken some months. It's a slow process. Moving around over such large areas takes time, and that's largely completed now. We know what we're looking for. We know the geology. We've carried out sampling across, as these things show, across the entire region. We're just waiting on the assays to come back now. We're getting a few in from the south. We worked our way south to north, and the preliminary results are looking quite positive. So they'll be probably complete, we would hope, before Christmas, but obviously December is a fairly hard month to get things done. So we'll see how we go. So the objective there is to really use the regional data to focus down on the key areas, not only to focus, but also to begin to drop land off. 3,000 kilometres is great, but it's also, it can become expensive if we have to maintain the licenses. So part of exploration is as quickly as you can prune off the ground you've got and focus, because it's just, you can't hold land of this size. So we'll begin the process in January of beginning to isolate and chop off bits and come back down to the key areas and work in more detail. So it's a very attractive area. There's also the potential for some deals with some of the local players who may be lacking capital to mine more in a more advanced way. Most of the mining in the area is very, very artisanal, very low quality, very low recoveries. In a lot of cases, only the tin is produced, when actually there's also probably equal value in niobium, or columbite, as minerals called. So there are some issues there that we can potentially substantially enhance the recoveries and the revenue from existing mines by bringing in, what we might refer to as modern technology, modern sampling techniques. So that's a slow burn, and that was potentially the place, but it looks to us to be a potential to build a fairly major industry there if things go well. So that'll begin to work again in the new year. The other project, again along the same lines, large land holding, low entry costs, was in the south of Argentina, in Santa Cruz province. Argentina is a federation of states, and so the states themselves control mining. So whether or not mining is welcome is a state-by-state issue, and Santa Cruz province is absolutely pro-mining, so it's one of the great places to go. It's also, fortunately, a place that's very, very well endowed with gold. There's a couple of major projects in the region. Just to the southeast of us is Cerro Vanguardia, which is run by Anglo Gold. It's probably 4 to 5 million ounces. Just off to the east is Ceramoro, which is Yamana, which is about 3 million ounces. And up to the northwest is Cerro Negro, which is Newmont. They inherited it through Barrick, who inherited it through Goldcorp. That's currently running at about, I think, 6 or 7 million ounces. So it does have the right rocks. It does have the right things going on. And obviously being close to those mines gives us a bit of a consolidation play. It's extremely mining friendly because it's very desolate. There's essentially no one lives here. It's just very dry, miserably cold, but good power, good water, good infrastructure. We can work quite happily. Again, we looked at projects that were very early stage, and we liked the idea that we could get in to an area which was essentially unexplored with a very low cost JV on a very large piece of land. And that was done last year, which I think that was a good deal. And unusually, we have the mechanism on that joint venture to earn 100%, which is really quite rare. I mean, most joint ventures, the partner coming in can get to maybe 70, 75, but we have the right to come all the way to 100%, which gives us, again, the options that should this prove to be attractive, we have options to do it ourselves or bring in other partners. So it's, again, the optionality is key. And we've subsequently found that Argentina is becoming a very attractive place, and everybody suddenly is coming to look down there because it's mining friendly. Politically, it has its color, but it's actually very mining friendly. And while it has economic challenges locally, those challenges actually work to make exploration there extremely cheap. So it's actually a combination of the finances, the very flat terrain makes it a very cheap place to explore. And for a junior company, we can work here, whereas Colombia, by dint of its terrain, is quite challenging. So it's a very good place to work, and we're quite happy to be there. The Deseado Massif is the main thing. We're looking at tertiary or quite old volcanics, but the mineralization is tertiary. It's about 150 million years old. It's quite well known. We look for sort of these north-south or northwest structures. The area we've got, there was no drilling, but certainly there was a lot of groundwork to suggest that there were some major alteration systems suggestive of a low sulfidation epithermal system. That was interesting. We've gone in beginning of this year and done a couple of phases of geochemistry, which came back with extremely positive results that we announced previously. Excuse me. We then have to have a winter recess. This place is pretty grim. So from about May to September, it's only for the brave, given the Arctic winds. So we've gone back in September, and we're doing a few more phases of geochemistry, plus ground magnetics and just general mapping. And again, the ground mag is really giving us some very fine detail of the major controlling structures. We're extending our geochemistry beyond the anomalous areas we mapped. And then just wandering around, just an old-fashioned way of wandering around looking for things, and we're finding veins here and there, and so we're beginning to find things that were previously unknown, undiscovered, which is again quite rare in these major mining districts, to be able to go out and find previously unknown mineralized systems. So we're moving forward there. The teams are still there mapping and sampling, and we have assays in the lab now. So again, Christmas permitting, we hope to have some assays coming out of there in at the end of the year, but if not, beginning of next year. So this is becoming an interesting project. This project was very much meant to be slow burn, low cash burn. But if these numbers from the current sampling campaign come back positively, we might reassess that. If we find some interesting drill targets, that might change in the new year. Having said that, we can't drill on the current permit. We need to submit some reports to move to a drilling permit. So there wouldn't be any drilling here, and therefore there wouldn't be any major cash burn here until the second half of next year after the winter. So it wouldn't be September. So it's quite exciting geologically, but we'll see how that one plays out at the end of this month. So it brings us to the end. So I think the company's in a good position, or certainly in a better position than when we found it in 2020. Ansar, despite the 2 steps forward, 1 step back situation, is still very exciting. We're not going to walk away from those recent drill holes at Pepas, even though there's a bit of thought required. They are nothing short of spectacular. The move to phase 2 of the joint venture is taking time. It's taking time for a good reason. And we're not going to apologise for the time it takes. There'll be no prizes for getting it wrong, so we have to really be careful with that. So we hope to get back to drilling in Ansar soon, but that's obviously out of our hands depending upon how the things pan out. Brazil tin venture looking good, at El Patano is, as I said, looking quite exciting. So it's we've got the company in what I think is a good position, albeit in a market where things are very difficult out there. And but we have the cash in the bank, and we have hopefully more coming in January. So I think we're in quite a strong position. So I'll leave it there, and I thank you for listening to me droning on. But I'm happy now to move into a range of questions and take as long as you like.
Brad, Lou, if I may just jump back in there, and thank you very much indeed for your presentation this morning. If I may, I will just bring back up your cameras there. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue to submit your questions just by using the Q&A tab that's situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. But just while the team take a few moments to review those questions that were submitted already, I would like to remind you that a recording of this presentation, along with a copy of the slides and the published Q&A, can be accessed via your investor dashboard. Louis, Brad, we did receive a number of pre-submitted questions ahead of today's event, and as you can see in the Q&A tab there, we have also received a number of questions during your presentation this morning too. So firstly, thank you to everyone on the call for taking the time to submit their questions. And Brad, Louis, if I could just hand back to you to address those where it's appropriate to do so, and then I'll pick up from you at the end. Thank you.
Okay. What I think we'll do is that I might throw Louis under the bus on some of the more difficult ones, such as the Colombian political ones. I'll stick with the geology. So Louis is in Colombia, and Louis, God bless him, speaks fluent Spanish. So I suppose one question, of course, is that's coming up. Looking at the screen is the applications. Louis, do we talk about where they stand?
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's any secret there. The applications are also taking a bit more time than anticipated. In large part, that's due to a change in government. So Colombia had an election, and there was a change in government regime some 2 months ago. As is usual, when new governments come in, decisions tend to get frozen, and that's common in the West as well as in more developing countries. And so there has been a hiatus in the consideration of the applications. We are still pushing hard. We do that not just here in Bogota with the central mining agency, but also locally in Antioquia, which is the local authority that deals with mining matters in Medellin, which is where Ansar is situated. The point to make here is that we don't have any reason to think that these will not be granted. We've done everything that needs to be done. We've filled in everything that needs to be done. But more importantly, the license areas we have are vast. There is a surface of targets to look at and to go for before we do much work on those license applications. So yes, it would be better had we received them, but would it actually change the amount of work and the nature and the location of that work? The answer is highly unlikely. Brad might like to comment, but I believe that slowdown in the applications coming through will not impact the company. Brad, do you want to add anything on that?
Yeah, look, it's disappointing. We had done a lot of work moving those applications forward, and the main event that needs to happen is the public audience. Or not we, but the Good Antioquia and the local secretariat arrange a series of public meetings with the local communities to not vote. There's no veto, but just to explain the process. And generally speaking, they're quite happy. Our leases cross 4 different municipalities, mostly ANSAR. ANSAR is extremely friendly to mining, by and large, as a result of the good work done by our team there over the years and carried on by Agnico to just carry out the social programs. Surrounding areas are not so friendly, but they just get minor corners here and there. So that would all been planned, and then, as Louis said, a new government came in. Colombia is slightly odd, well, not odd, but it's a South American issue, is that a lot of the key bureaucratic jobs are political, not like the UK where they're civil servants for life. Is that so? The head of this and the head of that and the head of so on and forth are become appointed in it, and they're new ones. And these new appointees decided that they wanted to put everything on hold until they began to get a better feel for things. So there was a bit of a few, I won't say missteps, but there were a few. The new government comes in full of bright ideas. They get pushed back, and a lot of companies, not just, in fact, most exploration companies have essentially stopped work in Colombia, just requesting greater communication, greater guidance, greater understanding of what exactly is going on. I think that message has been received, and from what we understand is that they're now becoming a little bit more communicative than they have in the past. So it's just a little bit of a, I won't say a protest, but a little bit of saying, hang on, guys, we need to know what the hell's going on. And so one of Louis' jobs these few days is to talk to the Vice Minister and just to express our interest in going forward, describe who we are, and so just let them know that what the impacts are of the bureaucratic machine becoming a bit clogged up. So it's just that, just presenting our case in a very polite way. So as Louis said, we have no knowledge of that not going ahead. It's just there has to be that sort of feeling of finding their feet, as it were, which is sadly the way politics works in South America. So, but as Louis said, I think we understand the applications. We can work. We can do mapping and sampling, and we've gone all over those things. We just can't drill. So we've mapped and sampled everything, and as a result of that, have got a pretty good idea of where the key areas are, and the key areas are on the eastern side, which have been granted. So yes, we would love to have had them granted, but it hasn't happened, but that's not at this time causing any great slowdown in drilling. There are other issues at play that are causing the slowdown.
No, thanks, Brad. And just to add, from my point of view, we are totally in bed with the right partners here. Newmont Agnico have got a great record in delivering projects in these somewhat difficult jurisdictions as these things become. The J venture is still going to another potentially 14 years to come, so there's a lot of time to claw back stuff that may get delayed a bit. And I would say the concerns of the government are those you would expect, environmental concerns, community formalization, but all those sorts of things we're already addressing, and Nico already addressed. So in part, I'm going to see the Vice Minister of Mines to say, look, this is the effect they're going to have if you don't listen to what we're saying, but we are expecting them to listen, and so we're going to tell them. We're going to tell them what it is. That it is responsible mining that we're carrying out, and responsible exploration. So, and as Brad says, they are very much listening. They did reverse something they had intended to bring in by way of tax changes. That hasn't now happened, and so we're expecting some movement, certainly on the applications in the next few weeks and months. So we will obviously let you know if things change. In the meantime, plenty of work to do on the licenses themselves. Now, I've got another question here, Brad, and I think you've addressed it in part in the presentation, which is playing on people's minds, which is how long are these negotiations going to go on, and is there a deadline to those? Well, the 90 days that we did have in the original agreement was something that everybody was intending to keep to under the previous rules that were in place. Because that's changed, as Brad explained, it is going to take a bit longer. There's two sets of things happening here in parallel. One is actually setting up the joint venture company, and the other one is agreeing the constituent documents of that company. Setting up the company will take a few months, and the reason for that to make it a tax efficient transfer of the assets, and secondly to ensure that we don't fall foul of having to go to ask for permissions, if you like, from government to get these things transferred, which would delay things. Both routes. The route to be followed is well understood, but it will take a few months to do. It involves setting up a new company in Colombia, and then spinning off the assets that we have currently in the existing company here in Colombia. So that will take a few months to do. But the negotiations will carry on the constituent documents that I mentioned earlier. Those are progressing. We have made some proposals, as Brad said, not surprisingly, we're wanting to change some of the specifics here, I guess in part to address some of the uncertainty that's being caused currently by the political scenario. But the political scenario is relatively short term. These things will settle down. So we're pushing back, and we will come to an agreement. When that agreement does come through, that is when the 2 million payment will be triggered. So we're not going to have to wait months and months. We're still on schedule, potentially. We're getting this to the end of January. It may slip. The important thing to note is we're sitting on $2.5 million of cash in the balance sheet with a partner that has to pay for all the exploration in Colombia, and we control the rate of expenditure in Brazil and Argentina. So to the extent that are we reliant on Agnico and Newmont have much leverage? Well, the reality is that we can stay it out a few weeks if we have to. But they want to get on. They want to get the agreement done. They're very keen on these assets. These assets don't come about very often, and they're at a relatively good stage in terms of results. Although these immediate results just have been a bit more disappointing. But that's part of exploration. We will get back to having strong results, and I expect there'll also be weaker results in the future. But it's just part and parcel of trying to identify precisely where these ore bodies are. And we're in bed with the right guys for all of this.
If I could, maybe just expand, add one or two things, is that there are two separate things. There is agreeing to the structure, and then there's doing the structure. And even though it might take months to do the structure, once you've agreed it, we carry on working. So technically speaking, September the 7th, phase 1 agreement ceased to exist. Now, we were entirely within our rights. Okay, boys, vacate the premises. You no longer have right of access. Go away until this is resolved. And we said, no, we want you to carry on. So we've given them dispensation to keep working, and we keep rolling it forward. But that's entirely within our gift. So in terms of what leverage we have, we have some. I mean, we could say to them, okay, bugger off. I mean, until you sign the agreement, we don't want you on site. So that's not helpful, but it's, we do have some ammunition, some negotiating clout here. And the issues are, we have an agreement that Newmont and Agnico signed back in 2018, and if they want to make changes, then they have to, one, explain what's changed their mind, why they suddenly want to change, and two, what's in it for us. So we're very cognizant of not giving away things in the longer term that could be quite substantial. And there was I'll just address another question that was asked earlier about what phase 3 is. Quite a complicated. Phase 2 is reasonably straightforward. So they own 51% now. If they don't proceed to phase 2, or we don't come to agreement, that flips back to we become majority shareholder. If they progress through phase 2, then they've earned 65%, and they have the right or the right to move to phase 3, which they earn another 10% by doing a DFS. Now the question there is, well, what happens then is that, and there was some wording in the agreement that how do we then protect our interest on that final 25%? And that to us is the key point, is that we hope that this is successful and moves forward, and we get 25, and then we want to be able to protect our position. It's the wording of phase 3 and some issues there. So I think we're negotiating. We're not calling each other names or pointing fingers or squabbling. We're just doing it in a grown-up fashion, but it's complicated, and as Louis said, we don't want to make a mistake, and every clause or every modification proposed can have all number of unintended consequences. We've got to go away and think about all these things, and you just can't react quickly. Otherwise, you could be bitten on the bum quite severely. So it's all in good faith, and we're all carrying on, but it's just business, and we can't rush.
Okay.
Just going to some more questions. I'll just jump to a technical one that someone's here noted about what's happened to some of the reassays or high grade results. There's probably just a bit of a rock story. We've made mention in the past about why some of the drilling results over the last couple of years have been delayed, and that's due to the need to reassay. They all get reassayed and the results are issued. What happens is that for gold assays, we use what we call fire assay. I won't explain what that means. You can go and Google it. The normal fire assay has a top limit of 10 grams per ton. So we put everything into assay, takes weeks to get the numbers back, and then a lot of them will come back over assay. And obviously that's a good thing. We like high grade, but that means they've got to be put back in again for just a slightly different finish to the assay, and they come back and they could be 11, they could be 100. So that's why we've had a lot of these high grade things, which is good, but it means that when they come back and we see these things, here we go, we've got to put them back in and get them reassayed. So when we finally do announce the assays, they do include the high grade reassays. That's why they take a bit longer. It is just part of geochemistry, and it's not a problem that most companies face, but we do because we've got lots of holes over 10 grams. So it's just the nature of the beast.
I've got a comment here on the phase 2, how long that could take. Well, phase 2 is, as we said, Brad said, 20 million to be spent over 4 years. The reality is that once these guys start to drill, they do tend to get through it rather more quickly. And we have expecting MMA, Minera Monte Aguila, to be spending well in excess of what would it be, $5 million a year. One would expect, easily they could expend twice that much. So do I think it's going to take 4 years once we kick off? No, I don't. I think it'll be a lot quicker like that once we resume operations. But they can speed that up significantly if that's what's needed, depending on the results.
A question for me, and could the company be set up a long time ago? Yeah, the answer is no. One, the devising a new structure is not simple. The discussion, the examination, the research to determine the structure is not a simple task. It's not a cheap task. There's lots of lawyer time involved, and lawyers aren't cheap. So we were not prepared to invest tens of thousands of your dollars in legal fees determining a structure until Agnico and Newmont had said, yeah, we're going to do this. So until we got the official word in our hand in September saying they're going to go, we had internal chats amongst ourselves, but ultimately, you need external expert advice, and that doesn't come cheap. So we're not going to we're not going to bite the bullet and go to the lawyers until we had confirmation that they are moving forward. And now that we know what's going on, we're not going to bite the bullet and form the company until we've agreed. So every step costs money, and we're not going to spend that money until we're absolutely sure it's being spent for a legitimate reason. So so yes, it would have been nice to do it years ago, but that's not the way that things actually work.
There's a short question here. Are either of the current players interested in El Pantano in Argentina? Well, the answer is they could be. It's probably still too early for them, so they'll let us do the work, which is common in these things. The junior miners go out and do the greenfield, and then we go from there. But yeah, totally possible. Newmont is in there to the north west of us in Cerro Moro, and there are other big players there. And yeah, I mean, they do respect the work that Brad does on the ground there, and we've got a pretty good team down there. So we have had discussions with them in the past. Indeed, before even I got involved, we were being seen by one of these guys as effectively doing the pilot work ahead of potential involvement. So it is possible. There's nothing there for the moment, but it's good to have a seat at the table with these big players who can move when they need to.
One question, what input, if any, do we have in locating the drill rigs at Pepas? That's easy, none. But we're trying to change that, and that's one of the things that we might toss into the bucket for negotiation.
It will be.
it's their money, so they ultimately get the right of the right to decide. We've up to this point there was no provision in the agreement for us to have any input at all. We just get told after the fact where it's going. Now I talked about my view of some of the drilling, and while I'm not saying that they did it badly, they did it differently to what I would do, and part of that is just the imperative of being a big company. I mean, I would do things differently because OROSUR has no money, and we don't need to find 10 million ounces. So my view would be we would have drilled in a far more conservative way, drilled off to the side, but into the previous hole, made sure we hit it, and then stepped out. Where they've just gone bang, big step out. Now that in part is because they can afford to, which is a nice problem to have. And I suppose we could argue that they're trying to test whether this is 10 million ounce. Now that's probably a legitimate argument, I think, but I'm not overly convinced. I think every time you drill a hole, particularly in this situation where you're trying to address uncertainty, you design a hole to give you to ask a specific question, and then make sure that the hole answers the question either positively, hits what you want and says, okay, that's good, or by missing or by giving a negative answer, it then tells you where to go. I think in this case, by attempting to address more than one variable, by trying to address two things, the depth and the depth, they've in effect addressed none of them. So yeah, I think we certainly would have put it forward on the table now that we want to now be involved in these discussions as a technical committee. And I don't imagine that they're going to, we have a right of veto, but certainly we'll put our stamp the table and say, look, we think it's right or wrong, or going forward. So yeah, that was, we had no right to do that. That wasn't in the agreement. We had no ability to force that, but it's something we would like to have written in now. So I think going forward, we're going to be a little bit, if we can, we'll be a little bit more vocal in just saying, what the hell are you doing? So yeah, watch this space.
Okay. There's another one here on drilling results. Are you releasing drilling results to the market when you receive them? Well, the answer is, if there is any material information out there, we are under an obligation to release those. There have been extensive delays, as everybody knows, certainly during COVID, being caused at the labs in ALS in Lima, where these things are flown to. And when we do have an RNS to release, as Brad says, it does need to go through Agnico with that. That's just a three-day process. So again, not significant. So the answer is yes. When we do have significant results, we do release those to the market.
Should Brad or Louis base themselves in South America? Well, I'm sure if you want to pay for it. That'd be lovely, but it's not helpful. I mean, yes, it would be nice to be there, but the decisions that are being made on the joint venture agreement are not being made in South America. I mean, they're being made in North America. They're being made in Denver and in Toronto. So yes, it would be therapeutic to be able to be there and yell at everybody, but it actually wouldn't be that useful. So these decisions of this level on these sorts of projects are made at several rungs above the South American level. So and we certainly have some contacts there, and we'll continue to have contacts there, but actually being on the ground, it's more visual. It doesn't actually achieve a great deal. So I think at the moment we'll stay where we are and yell from a distance. But we are comfortable. As I said, big companies move at their own pace, and that pace is not what we would do. And there are complications. Having two big partners makes it even worse. And Agnico have also had some issues recently. They've gone through a couple of major mergers. They merged with Kirkland Lake, which is a massive merger. That's being bedded down. They're currently involved in another merger of Yamana with another company. So there's again things to bed down. So I don't know where we stand on the to-do list. Probably not page one, but hopefully top of page two. So things, we're not. And I saw another comment earlier, another question about we don't see ourselves mentioned on Agnico or Newmont news flow, and that's never going to happen, and not until they find something huge, because exploration results are almost never published by major companies. They're just not material to the share price. These are massive producers of gold. Drilling a hole in the middle of Colombia is exciting, but it's not going to move the share price. So they, apart from a one paragraph line in the annual report, you're never going to see comments about us or about our drilling by those big companies. So I think if they had their way, they would like to have no announcements. And I think they find our announcements quite annoying because it's giving away information that they would rather not give in a competitive sense, and also potentially for attracting artisanal miners. So they see our need to announce as a bit of a necessary evil, which they'd rather do away with. But we do what we can, but you'll never see them talking about it.
So 2 short questions here. Will the new JV company be floated on the LSE, and how worried are you about future funding in the current environment? So on the first question, the joint venture company, no, I don't expect that to be floated on the LSE. One would float principally for profile as well, but principally funding. But the funding of that JV is going to be through Minera Monte Agnico and Newmont. So no, I expect that will not be floated on the LSE. That wouldn't be one of the plans. In relation to future funding, we do have cash on the balance sheet, and these 2 big players are funding Colombia. So really, it's deciding how much we want for Brazil and Argentina. We're not going to have any major activity in those 2 places, as Brad said. Certainly in Argentina until the back end of the year, because if we do want to drill, we need environmental impact assessment, and we need some permitting to happen. So that's going to take quite a few months. So if there is any need for funding, it'll be stuff to go into the ground, and it won't be at the earliest until the end of next year. And frankly, when we receive this 2 million from our partners in Colombia, that also will take off the pressure. So we're in a relatively stable situation, if you like, but the environment is undoubtedly difficult, and I wouldn't like to be facing go out to the market in the next 3 to 4 months. It's not something we need to do.
So I think we're done now.
We just about covered this kind of thing.
I think we've covered all the ones that aren't rude. So we're
Brad, Lou, if I may just jump back in there, and thank you very much indeed for being so generous with your time there and addressing every single question that came in from investors. And of course, if there are any further questions that do come through, we'll make these available to you immediately after the presentation has ended for you to review, to then add any additional responses, of course, where it's appropriate to do so. Louis, perhaps before redirecting those on the call to provide you with their feedback, which I know is particularly important to yourself and the company, if I could please just ask you for a few closing comments to wrap up with, that'd be great.
Well, first of all, just to say thank you to everybody to coming to participating and coming on. We do like to have these questions. We do like to communicate with shareholders, and this is quite an effective way of doing it. Secondly, just say thanks to Brad, because he always takes the brunt of all these presentations. I just sit in the background, so I know there's a lot of work going into this beforehand, so thank you, Brad. Look, we're definitely going through a difficult phase with the company right now, but it's difficult for the right reasons. It's an exciting asset. People want to grab as much of it as they can and negotiate as hard as they can on it. We have got some protections in there already from the existing agreement. There will be renegotiation on some parts, but I'm confident that we'll come out with the right result at the end of that time. Precisely when that will be is hard to say, but again, here I am in Colombia today. Let's see what we can progress. But they're big companies. They do take a bit longer than we do. And there are 2 sets of lawyers here. There's Bogota lawyers and there's Canadian counsel involved as well. But things are moving in the right direction. It's a very good asset to go for and to get the right result on. We're sitting on cash. We don't absolutely have to rush this. We'll do it in the right time frame. And as soon as we have results of movement and anything material, we will obviously be coming out with information to you all and to the market generally. So thank you very much for attending. I think that's it from me. We will keep you updated as and when things develop.
Louis, that's great. And Brad as well. Thank you once again for updating investors this morning.
Pleasure.
Could I please ask investors not to close this session, as you'll now be automatically redirected for the opportunity to provide your feedback in order that the management team can better understand your views and expectations. This will only take a few moments to complete, but I'm sure will be greatly valued by the company. On behalf of the management team of OROSUR Mining Inc., we would like to thank you for attending today's presentation. That now concludes today's session, so good morning to you all.